The drone revolution is happening right now, and all across the world, nations and non-state actors are trying to take advantage. Ukraine has emerged as the world's foremost authority in low-cost, versatile drone design, and the Russian Federation isn't far behind. Nations like China and Turkey shift their military industrial capacity, preparing to churn out mass numbers of UAVs at a stunning speed, while China, America, Europe, and other geopolitical forces try to build unmanned systems that can outperform the best human warfighters. Rebel groups, terrorist organizations, and even crime syndicates have proved that they're on the cutting edge, from Yemen's Houthi rebels to Mexico's cartels. And today, they pose a more salient threat to the world's nations than ever before. But if there's one nation that's cracked the code on modern drone warfare and built what might be the greatest drone in all of modern warfare, then that nation is Iran, and the world's perfect drone is the Shahed 136. Now, it's not meant to be pretty, and it's not meant to be elegant, but the Shahed 136 is an exceptionally potent weapon on today's battlefields. It flies at a very long range, it's hard to detect, and it carries a substantial warhead, but it's also really cheap, really easy to make, and it's very easy to smuggle in large numbers. Also, it's super adaptable to fit the needs of its operators. Now, look, it's not the best at anything, but that's not really the point. And now, Iran's rivals and even its archenemies are working to add the Shahed 136 to their arsenals as quickly as possible. Iran may not be the true military powerhouse that it claims to be, but with the Shahed 136, Iran struck gold. And now, the world has no choice but to try and keep up. The fact that a weapon is impressive doesn't mean that it's going to be useful. Take America's F-22 Raptor, an incredibly sophisticated warplane that's still widely regarded as the best air superiority fighter ever to enter service worldwide, even as it's about to reach 20 years of continuous operation. It is unbelievably stealthy, it's highly dynamic in flight, it combines all sorts of cutting-edge technology, and it absolutely sucks at trench warfare. Sure, it could fly above a trench battle and rain hell down upon its adversaries, but if you take this ultra-advanced, world-class tool of warfighting and put it on a truck bed, drive it up to the front lines of an ongoing trench engagement and present it to the troops so that they can gain a decisive advantage over enemy forces, they're definitely going to look at you as if you've lost your mind, and where the f*** did you get an F-22? Now, we presented you with this rather ridiculous hypothetical in order to emphasize a principle that's going to be very important in understanding the Shahed 136. Just because a weapon or war machine is impressive doesn't mean it's useful, and even when a war machine might seem unimpressive, it can still be the most useful tool on the battlefield. Turn back the clock about a decade, and advanced military powers were already well on their way to figuring out the principles of highly sophisticated drone warfare. UAVs like America's Predator and Reaper drones, Turkey's TB2, or China's Wing Long, known abroad as the pterodactyl, were already in the sky. Behind closed doors, brilliant military minds were scheming to build artificially intelligent combat aircraft capable of outflying and outthinking human adversaries flying conventional manned aircraft. But even though reusable strike and reconnaissance drones still do have their place today, and even though unmanned combat drones are drawing ever closer on the horizon, the most important branch of modern drone warfare was almost precisely the opposite of what those military minds had envisioned. Take a look at a place like Ukraine, where 21st century drone warfare is being developed to its fullest potential, and drone warfare is ugly. It's downright unsophisticated, it's reliant on the cheapest possible technologies that can be effective, it's built into platforms that are designed to be destroyed, while innovation is bootstrapped, jerry-rigged, and at times almost comedic in its simplicity. Ukraine is not a place where the smartest or most autonomous drone wins. Ukraine is a place where a drone wins a fight because somebody strapped a knife onto it and flew it really hard at the other guy's drone, pointy end first. It's in that gritty side of drone warfare where excellence almost always loses out to effectiveness, where the Shahed 136 is able to thrive. First designed by the nation of Iran sometime in the late 2010s or the early 2020s, the Shahed 136 is a cheap, lightweight device that's properly referred to as a, quote, loitering munition, but is better understood by a less flattering name, a kamikaze drone. Unlike the drones that advanced militaries were focused on around that time, Iran designed the Shahed 136 so that in an ideal world, it would never come home at the end of a mission. Instead, the drone's objective is to carry as heavy a warhead as possible and do its very best to smash it into a target with its onboard explosives set to detonate upon impact. But even in comparison to missiles or other technology that's designed to fill a similar function, the Shahed's design and its technical specs would appear, at first glance, to be resoundingly unimpressive. Shaped like a delta wing with a blended tubular fuselage running down the middle, the Shahed is dull, grey, and mostly smooth, except for a couple of stabilizer fins on the wingtips. It's powered by a single pusher propeller at the rear end, only capable of flying the drone at a top speed of around 185 km per hour or 115 miles per hour. It's significantly slower than the cruising speed of even a basic single-engine personal aircraft. It only measures about 3.5 meters in length by 2.5 meters wide, which is about 11 by 8 feet. It carries an onboard warhead of 50 kilograms or 110 pounds, which makes up a quarter of its overall mass, just 200 kilograms or 440 pounds. It's small, it's slow, it's bumbling, and it seems as if it would be quite easy to just shoot it out of the sky. But dig a little deeper on the Shahed 136, and we can start making a list of its strengths, and then watch, surprised and, well, slightly bemused, as that list of strengths starts getting longer and longer and longer. We'll start with its observability, where, although it's not technically stealthy, it's surprisingly hard to detect. It's built in a way that makes it hard to spot on radar, and it's even harder to identify because of its small size. While in flight, it's meant to fly low and slow above forests, rooftops, or even the surface of deserts, plains, or oceans. As such, it's able to hug the terrain and avoid radar, and even if it is spotted, it's easily mistaken for a bird, or worse, a civilian aircraft that a counter-drone operator wouldn't want to risk shooting down. Not only that, but it flies at a very long range for its size, upwards of 2,500 kilometers or 1,600 miles. Reports on its flight endurance can vary widely, but it's believed to be able to fly for close to a day straight, at least under favorable conditions. It doesn't have to be manually operated. Instead, it flies using a basic artificial intelligence pilot and a small suite of sensors, including precise but consumer-grade satellite GPS and an inertial navigation system that keeps it on course without any need for external references. It's highly modular, capable of carrying explosive warheads of varying types or onboard cameras for reconnaissance, and it can launch with the assistance of rockets from the back of a truck, making it very easy to conceal and deploy with almost zero advance notice. And perhaps most important of all, the Shahed 136 is ridiculously cheap. On the export market, although it's not on offer in any public-facing way, it seems to be sold for roughly $193,000. That's about half the price of the most basic American Sidewinder air-to-air missile on the market today, or less than 1/20th of the price of a single Patriot air defense interceptor missile. And also, Jesus Christ, those are expensive. But the vast majority of that price tag is believed to represent Iran's attempt to leverage its design to make some pretty massive profits, and according to most estimates, the cost of actually producing a Shahed 136 is somewhere between $50,000 at the high end and as low as $10,000 at the bottom end. To achieve that, the Shahed 136 makes heavy use of consumer-grade parts, including everything from parts of the fuselage to the internal wiring to the 4G SIM cards that it uses to fly. Prices that low on a long-range explosive munition of any kind are practically unheard of in the modern world, or at least they were unheard of until the global drone revolution really got underway. The rock-bottom price of the Shahed 136 confers a massive advantage for any nation that can get their hands on it, especially nations that can get Iran to agree to help them set up their own production lines. For one thing, that price point makes the Shahed 136 practically disposable, and for another, it means that you can get 10 or 20 or 50 or 100 copies of the drone for the same price as some relatively basic pieces of modern military hardware. Again, the price of one American Patriot interceptor missile is $4 million. One missile. And if we assume that the lowest estimate about the Shahed 136 costs are true, then America's rivals could produce 400 Shaheds for the price of that single interceptor. What that means is that the Shahed 136 is the ideal swarm weapon, built to be produced in such high numbers that it would hardly matter if the overwhelming majority got shot down. A 50-kilogram warhead may not be an extraordinary payload, but it's not something to take lightly, and even if most Shaheds in a swarm attack don't get through to their targets, the first ones that do survive will be able to deal considerable damage. And perhaps most important of all, the Shahed 136 serves smaller or less powerful militaries, or even non-state actors, as a force equalizer, and one that's able to hit more powerful adversaries where it really hurts. The Shahed 136 doesn't just attack adversary soldiers or their military equipment, it attacks their wallets, and more specifically, it attacks the defense budgets that powerful nations depend on. The cost of a single Patriot interceptor may be equal to the cost of 400 Shahed drones, but a single Patriot interceptor is not able to shoot down 400 Shahed drones. It's able to shoot down one. So, if a nation like Iran were to shoot 400 Shahed drones in the direction of known American Patriot batteries and watch as every single one of its drones was intercepted, Iran still wins the larger game. To finance that attack, Iran had to spend about $4 million. To shoot down every drone, the United States had to use $1.6 billion. For that reason, drones like the Shahed 136 are an incredible equalizer between underfunded, underpowered militaries or asymmetric actors and the major powers that they've typically been unable to challenge. A nation that uses the Shahed 136 in high volumes doesn't have to defeat a more powerful adversary. They just have to convince that adversary that their war comes at an unbearable cost. When the Shahed 136 first appeared on the global stage in the final months in advance of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, it was treated as if it was something of an annoyance, even a bit insulting by a fair proportion of Western leaders and analysts. After all, here was America and its allies working hard to develop the very best cutting-edge drones that the world had ever seen, and there was Iran, thinking that it could spam its way through combat by using some cheap, unimaginative imitation. When Russia started to use and then mass-produce its own Shahed imitations under the name Garan 2, the disdain from the global West only grew. I mean, of course, the illiberal autocrats were working together in what Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky decried as a, quote, collaboration with evil. And of course, Russia and Iran would find out in short order that their shoddy technology paled in comparison to the NATO standard hardware that Ukraine would soon have at its disposal. Fast forward a few short years, and the tone from the rest of the world is rather different, isn't it? The Shahed 136 is still a poor piece of technology. It's still an affront to Western sensibilities, but it's also a major and entirely credible threat. These days, the Shahed 136 is an object of acute concern, as it enables a crawling Russian advance in eastern Ukraine, lays waste to cities far from the front, and at times swarms across the Middle East from Iran en route to Israel. The Shahed 136 still isn't loved, and not by a long shot, but it's understood, and its capabilities are finally being respected. And if there was any doubt that the Shahed 136 was gaining the world's respect, well, there's a reason they say imitation is the sincerest form of flattery. In late September of 2025, defense reporter Alistair MacDonald wrote a report for the Wall Street Journal entitled "Every Nation Wants to Copy Iran's Deadly Shahed Drone." Now, of course, we have to admit the title is a bit of an exaggeration, far be it from humble Vanuatu or quiet little Uruguay to try and pose an asymmetric drone threat to their nearest neighbors. But MacDonald's larger point was rock solid. Right now, nations from the United States to France to Britain to China are all trying to build their own long-range, low-cost kamikaze drones in the Shahed style. According to some, it's not even worth keeping up appearances of originality and innovation that Western industry prizes. Global militaries need the Shahed 136 or something better, and if they could copy the Shahed directly, well, they would. In the United States, a growing number of military leaders are starting to echo concerns that outside analysts have expressed for years, that by focusing so intensely on sophisticated but costly UAV technology, the United States has now stumbled into a capability gap when it comes to the type of drone warfare that the Shahed 136 is made for. Even before the war in Ukraine, engagements like the one between Armenia and Azerbaijan in 2020 demonstrated the depth of knowledge that the United States was lacking. Speaking to the War Zone, the commissioner of the US Army's tactically focused V Corps, Lieutenant General Charles Constanza, acknowledged that the US needed a drone of a very similar make to the Shahed 136, something that the US really should have been working on half a decade ago. Days after Costanza's comments, another US general, also speaking to the War Zone, made a similar admission. This time, it was Major General J. Barthelme's, commander of the 25th Infantry Division, who admitted that lessons learned in Ukraine have shone a rather unflattering light on America's slowness to adapt to changing technology. Barthelme's described the Shahed 36 as, quote, exactly the type of capability that we would love to have for our allies and partners in the region. Meaning in this context, in the Indo-Pacific. Quoting again about America's production decisions, we are behind in that sense. We need to push faster. All the services, frankly, are on this chase to move faster. We aren't moving fast enough. End quote. As experts outside the US military frequently point out, America's sluggishness in trying to develop something akin to the Shahed 136 has been stunning, even concerning, when it's compared against America's obvious willingness and ability to produce and adopt other new kinds of warfighting equipment. An outcome that would reflect the US truly learning the lessons of the Shahed 136 and its use in Ukraine would be for the US to have the production capacity already in place to build multiple tens of thousands of these drones each year, even in peacetime. Instead, America's Pentagon has been very slow to break itself of ideas that seemed to work during the Cold War and the following decades. Specifically, the quality of military equipment was simply more important than quantity. The Shahed 136 has turned that equation on its head, and seemingly more because of sentimental attachment than any practical consideration, Washington has refused to respond. Although programs like the Replicator initiative a couple of years back were well-intentioned, they still fell far short of what was actually required. But now, even if it's more than a little late, the Pentagon appears to be changing its thinking. Across America's military-industrial complex, initiatives to build Shahed-style drones are starting to gather more attention. The startup SpectreWorks is working on its FLM-136, better known as the Lucas, outwardly a very similar design to its Iranian counterpart, and while it features a lower range, endurance, and payload capacity than the Shahed, it's a valuable first step toward building a larger successor. Then there's the Arrowhead UAS, already on offer through Griffin Aerospace, again, a smaller version of the Shahed 136, but this time already able to be launched from truck-mounted systems or using rockets. Then there's the Artemis, built in collaboration between drone software company Auterion and hardware manufacturers in Ukraine, which has now been operationally tested on Ukrainian soil and can engage in AI-enabled operations even in places where GPS signals are being jammed. Finally, the US Air Force has recently requested that private industry produces at least 16 attempts to reverse engineer a Shahed 136, suggesting that those drones will be used as a basis for future development of both drone and counter-drone systems. Halfway across the world, China is hard at work putting its own Shahed copy into action, designated by Beijing as the ASN 301. The drone bears a very close resemblance to Iran's Shahed 136 and may have been designed using specs and principles provided by Iran directly, considering the relatively close relationship between the two nations. The ASN 301 is purportedly designed to target and neutralize enemy radar systems, first identifying radar origin points, then honing in to destroy the source. Notably, China appears to have also leaned on the technology behind the Israeli drone that Iran's Shahed 136 was initially based on, the Harpy. Ironically, the Harpy is thought to have served as the basis for the Shahed 136, despite the 136 having been initially intended to target Israel, and even the Harpy was based on an earlier German design. China also flies another copy of the Shahed 136, this time seeming to be based fully on the Iranian design and designated by China the Sunflower 200. The Sunflower is believed to be a very close imitation of Iran's work, and copies of the Sunflower have been used by Sudan's Rapid Support Forces to strike an airbase during the country's civil war. Nor is China the only military in East Asia to be working toward a Shahed-style design. In 2023, Taiwan revealed that it had built its own platform using basically the same principles. Meanwhile, in Europe, Britain has been promising a piece of technology to boast about, the Sky Shark by MGI Engineering. According to its makers, the Sky Shark can fly well over twice as fast as the Shahed, at around 450 km per hour or 280 miles per hour. That said, it does feature a severely diminished range and payload capacity when compared to the Shahed 136. It uses a very different and lower endurance design, and it's estimated to cost about $67,000 per unit. It's still cheap, but nowhere near as cost-effective as the Shahed. So, while the UK has certainly produced an interesting piece of technology, it's not clear that London has fully learned the lessons of the drone revolution. Paris is doing substantially better for itself by way of the new one-way effector drone developed by the missile manufacturer MBDA. The drone is meant to cruise at very low speeds, just 40 km per hour or 25 miles per hour, while carrying a warhead of up to 40 kilograms and a range of up to 500 kilometers. That's £90 for 310 miles if you prefer freedom units. A heavier version, the crossbow, carries a warhead of up to 300 kilograms or 660 pounds at ranges over 800 kilometers or 500 miles. The company hopes to be able to build up to 1,000 copies of its base model per month, and while the one-way effector still doesn't match the Shahed 136 in capabilities, it clearly lays the foundation for scaled-up designs later. Elsewhere in the NATO alliance, Turkey is known to have at least experimented with its own Shahed imitation, known as the Azab, and photographed above Turkey in 2023. Regardless of which country ultimately imitates the Shahed 136, they'll need to imitate not just its design principles, but its modularity. In service with Iran, and especially Russia, the Shahed 136 has gone through rapid evolutions in multiple directions constantly for the last several years straight. They've been converted into new variants, given new software and hardware, been fitted with better engines, or even jet engines, and retrofitted inventively to adapt them to take on new tasks. Some are even reusable at times, depending on what they're used for, specifically not being used in a kamikaze strike. All the while, they've been made cheaper using more and more consumer-grade equipment as it becomes available, and further enhancing their ability to bleed Western budgets dry. It's not enough for America or China or Europe to simply make a clone model of the Shahed 136 and start mass-producing it without any further thought. If they're going to be successful, then they must build their drones in a way that allows for constant updates and innovation, and they'd best get accustomed to that innovation process in peacetime, because they're going to need it in war. Despite the world's early disdain for the Shahed 136, it's now become abundantly clear to global militaries that Iran figured something out about drone warfare long before the rest of the world caught on. The Shahed 136 isn't a superweapon, it's far from invincible, but while the rest of the world was focused on building weapons that were as advanced and as promising as possible, Iran was working an entirely different angle. The Shahed 136 works because it's everything that advanced militaries never expected: a low-cost, long-range, high-impact kamikaze weapon designed to be launched by its operators and never seen again. There are much broader lessons the world can learn from the Shahed 136, starting with the reason that Iran chose to develop it in the first place. Yes, it's effective, and yes, it's innovative in its own way. But it is not a coincidence that Iran, an ambitious but militarily underpowered nation dealing with a crush of sanctions, was the nation to build it. Iran has never had much of a chance at military parity with its arch-enemy Israel, let alone with its other enemies across the world. Instead, Iran has had to focus on lower-cost alternatives, whether by supporting and supplying asymmetric proxy forces across the Middle East, building missile technology instead of investing in long-range aircraft, or focusing on a nuclear deterrent instead of a conventional one. Iran innovated in a direction that led to the Shahed 136 because Iran's solutions need to be ones that work within Iran's operational constraints. That's particularly important to understand because, as we explained at the outset of this episode, innovations in drone warfare typically aren't coming from the world's major powers. They're coming from places like Iran or Ukraine, nations that are trying to work against larger adversaries with more powerful militaries and far deeper pockets. They're coming from insurgencies and cartels and syndicates that have zero chance at acquiring conventional air power, but that can easily purchase a quadcopter from a local electronics shop and strap a grenade onto it. If the US, China, Europe, or other geopolitical power players are going to succeed in the global drone race, then they're going to have to find a way to break through their baked-in sensibilities and innovate like the little guys do. Iran and Ukraine decided to attack their adversaries' pocketbooks because that's where they knew they couldn't otherwise compete. The most powerful nations on Earth would be wise to acknowledge that and put themselves in the position of an adversary who needs to struggle a bit in order to keep up. The Shahed 136 is not the perfect drone because it's an amazing piece of hardware. It's the perfect drone because it used newly available drone technology in order to wiggle into the cracks of the global military-industrial ecosystem and then break the entire thing apart. Now, of course, as potent as the Shahed 136 or similar models might be today, they might not be so formidable tomorrow. Drones are evolving fast, but counter-drone technologies are evolving to keep up. Earlier in this episode, we discussed the cost of a single Shahed drone compared to the cost of a Patriot interceptor, but Ukraine doesn't use Patriot interceptors to deal with Shaheds anymore. The nation uses first-person interceptor drones meant to fly right up to the Shahed 136 and either detonate or otherwise take it out of the sky. Ukraine uses jamming technology to inhibit the drone's ability to fly or navigate, and flies cheap, refitted propeller planes to either gun them down or at times just smack them with their wingtips. It uses simple, decently high-caliber guns, trusting its soldiers to shoot the Shahed out of the sky at a time when it's flying no higher than a flock of birds. Now, we'll certainly grant you that Ukraine is an innovator in this space, and that if Iran or another nation were to use the Shahed 136 against a country like America or the NATO nations of Europe, they'd be far less prepared to intercept at low cost. Those nations would still have to rely on Patriot interceptors or other air defense interceptor systems or air-to-air munitions launched from fighter jets in order to stop them. But that equation is changing too, even though it's not changing quite as fast. Western companies are working hard on new types of interceptor drones, from the American Switchblade and Anvil to the British Skyhammer to the Swiss Hornet. There are also Ukrainian models like the Sting that NATO might buy in large quantities or license to produce in their own countries once the war ends, similar to what Britain is already doing with another Ukrainian design known as the Octopus. Beyond interceptor drones, advanced nations are also working on directed energy weapons, microwave devices that can fry their internal systems, and lasers that can blind their sensors or at higher intensity even melt them out of the sky. Conventional manned aircraft like France's Mirage 2000D and America's F-15E Strike Eagle and A-10 Warthog are being modified to serve as specialized carriers for counter-drone precision kill systems. Right now, it's really a good time to be a drone like the Shahed 136, but its time will come to an end, but just not today. As for what will happen today, the answer is almost certainly in the same core principles that have fueled the modern drone revolution: innovation and iteration. When it comes to modern drones, innovation isn't some grand experiment, it's a rat race where the scrappy and the unconventional can thrive, while the orthodox, the rich, and the bloated tend to fall behind. And in the world of drone warfare, iteration isn't optimal, it's mandatory, and any drone that has even the slightest chance of being successful will be designed on the expectation that it'll soon become irrelevant. Ukraine, Iran, and a range of drone-powered fighting factions are rising to the challenge. Now the most advanced military powers on Earth will have to decide whether they can swallow their pride, roll up their sleeves, and find their own place in the drone revolution. Thank you for watching.